Welcome to the shores of Lake Erie and Cedar Point Amusement Park. I wanted to do a walkthrough this year because we're staying, first of all, at this little cottage on the right at Lighthouse Point. And Lighthouse Point gets its name from that lighthouse that you can see off in the distance on the left there. And what I'm going to do is a different kind of walkthrough. I'm going to start from the perspective of if you're staying at the resort in this area, how you would get to the park from here. And I'm going to do a sort of back to front walkthrough, unlike what I've done in the past. This is a really beautiful area. The cottages are really nice. They are not cheap, but they're really nice. And essentially, if you wanted to get to the park from this area, you would follow this sidewalk, and you see the sidewalk on the right. That's where you would walk and follow that down to the check-in building, the office building. So we're going to dissolve over to the office building over there. By the way, the section in front of you here has a pool and a hot tub. There's towels that you can get over there, and that's the bathhouse over on the right. And of course, in front of us is Steel Vengeance, the backside of it, which a lot of people don't get to see unless you're staying in this resort. So following that sidewalk would have taken you right down here. There's the office over on the right. You can see that big yellow tower is Top Thrill Dragster. And the red track far in the distance is Magnum. The huge parking lot that you see in front of us is used mostly for the water park, and you can see part of the water park, which is called Cedar Point Shores. And that is a hugely popular water park. In fact, like most amusement parks, their big attendance is more at the water park than it is at the amusement park itself. So we're going to walk through this parking lot. I'm not going to take you all the way through. I'm going to pick up over by Gemini over there on the right, and we'll continue from there. So there in front of us is the first drop of Gemini, and here's the little blue path through the parking lot that takes us over to the back entrance. And I'm saying back, this is the northernmost area of the park. We're at the tip of the peninsula. Now, the day I was there was quite windy, but nothing compared to the day before when we arrived. There was a nor'easter blowing through, and they had pretty much steady 40-mile-an-hour winds, torrential rain and flooding, and everything in the park was running. I couldn't believe it. All the coasters were running, and people were standing out there getting drenched in the pouring rain. But today, as you'll see, we have a beautiful blue sky, and pretty much none of the coasters were running except for the mine train and the kiddie coasters. Everything else was down until later on in the day, which was a little odd to me, considering everything was running under much worse conditions. And there's the entrance to Cedar Point Shores. And we're going to keep following this sidewalk here, which is going to curve around to a crosswalk where that tractor is. And the crosswalk will take us over into the back entrance to Cedar Point. Everything in the park was looking really sharp when I was there. Everything had gotten a nice fresh coat of paint. There were a lot of minor changes in the park, but there were some big changes that I want to look at this year. Also, of course, because of content match hell, the park was playing pop music really loudly everywhere, so you're going to hear a lot of backwards music in order to avoid the content matches. That's just the nature of the beast. And that's the entrance over there, so we're going to dissolve over into the park. The red track overhead is the run up to the lift hill for Magnum. We're going to walk underneath that. And we're going to make a big counterclockwise swoop of the park. We'll start here with the awkwardly named Backbeat Queue, which serves all sorts of ribs and, barbecued food. The giant hill of Top Thrill Dragster is there. It was silent, and it was going to be silent the entire 2022 season. There was an accident in 2021, and the park was found to not be at fault, but to be safe, they're just not running it at all this year. Over on the left was the walkway toward the south end of the park, and we're going to not take that. We're going to go this way. And you can see the Gemini over on the right, and this area is called the Gemini Midway for obvious reasons. And I don't know if I've ever done a walkthrough of Camp Snoopy before, but I figured might as well do that just in case, because it all ends up in the same place. The big blue coaster off in the distance there is the famous Millennium Force, the first roller coaster to top 300 feet in height. Camp Snoopy, as you might expect from the name, is a kiddie area. Cedar Point has a long-standing relationship with the Peanuts franchise, and everything here are fairly standard kiddie rides, but themed very nicely to Peanuts. I don't know if you can hear it, but faintly in the distance there was the whistle of the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad, which is a vintage steam engine that runs from the main Midway, and it takes you over to Frontier Town at the very north end of the park. It's a really nice ride. And the two trips are very different. The northbound trip is along Perimeter Road, and that's along the lake shore. And the southbound trip is through Boneville, which has a lot of silly animatronics of skeletons chasing each other and getting drunk and playing banjos. It's pretty funny. And over here is the Camp Snoopy Theater, and they have shows that go on for kids all day, and then you can have photo ops with the Peanuts characters. And on the left is a Woodstock Express. Over on the right there was Wilderness Run. So those were two of the three coasters in the park that were running. If you're not familiar with Cedar Point, you may ask, well, how many coasters does the park have? You can see a lot of them so far in the video. Well, the park now has 16 coasters. It had 17, but one of them got removed over this past season. And we'll talk about that when we get to there. Twin Arrow Acres is a little rest area for adults and kids. And just behind there you can see Pipe Scream going through its course. So if we were to continue down on the right, we would end up back where we came in. So we're going to take a left instead. Over here is the Happy Friar, which has the park's famous cheese on a stick. My favorite delicacy when I'm at the park. That is the Slingshot, which is an upcharge. In the distance you can see Steel Vengeance. Over on the right is the station for the Gemini. Cedar Point in 2020 was 150 years old. They were still advertising that fact when we were there, basically because the pandemic shut so much down. It just felt so good to be out again at a park without being constricted by masks. Everyone felt very comfortable there, and everything seemed to be in pretty good shape. The only difference was as always, they were having a lot of trouble getting help. So a lot of concessions still weren't open. A lot of food stands weren't open. A lot of games weren't open. And they had a lot of food trucks at the park to sort of compensate for that. That's the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railway heading to Boneville through that area. And here we are now entering Frontier Town. That big windmill in front of us was new. Shady Hollow over there for relaxing. And we're going to be coming up on the big new thing in this one area here. If we were to hang a left, we would go by the Cedar Creek Mine Ride, which you can see on the left there. And it all winds around and interconnects anyway with this big grove in the middle. And off in the distance there you can see Skyhawk swinging people back and forth. That actually is a dead end over there where Skyhawk is, so we're not going to go down there. Frontier Town and Frontier Trail have really the nicest theming in the park, pretty much the only theming in the park. Cedar Point prides itself on being an old-fashioned carnival-style park, really focused on rides, and they surround you with the rides everywhere. And so theming isn't really a big focus, but this is really nicely done, this whole area. And the new addition that we're going to show you is no exception. Over here on the left used to be a antique car ride. In fact, at one time there were 3 antique car rides in this park. They're now down to 1. They got rid of this one. And this covered bridge here used to be where the antique cars went through, but this has been all just gutted and completely redone into a brand new restaurant. And that really seems to be a focus of the park lately, is putting in more and more places to eat. And it's another barbecue style restaurant, and it's called Big Cedar Farms, and we're going to take a look at it in a minute here. There's Steel Vengeance in the distance, and the red track over there is Maverick, which we'll see in a little more detail in a moment. Now that little tiny booth in front of us straight ahead is Sagebrush Sue's, and that was the only place in the park where you could get cheese on a stick while I was there. May 6th was the park's opening day, which was unusual for them. Normally they would open around Memorial Day, but they decided to push it and do it a month early. And so we were there on opening weekend. This was just the second day the park was open. Actually the first official day, because they had a special day for people on the day before, during the massive storm. You can see all these people are lined up for Maverick, and it wasn't running. They were still testing it, but people were anticipating it was going to open, so they were all getting in line ahead of time. And Maverick is a pretty intense ride. It's unusual for the park in that it wasn't trying to break any records when it was built. Usually that's what Cedar Point went for. But instead, it was built to be incredibly twisty and very powerful. A lot of 2 launches in the ride, and you don't know which end is up when you're riding it. It's very intense. So, here we are at Big Cedar Farms, and they did a really nice job landscaping this area, and they even put a little music stage and people were playing outside. It's still, as you can see, hasn't grown in yet, so they have all these areas cordoned off so you don't walk on the newly planted grass. But look at the number of tables out here for sitting and eating. It's built to serve a ton of people. And again, really nicely themed to fit in the area. Now, across from us you see the pizza joint, and then way over on the left of that is the Town Hall Museum, which has a lot of really interesting memorabilia about Cedar Point. There's a fairly standard wave swinger. And if we went left, that would take us to Skyhawk, and that's a dead end, like I said. So instead we're going to follow this path, which will take us over to Frontier Trail. And this is one of the big drops on Maverick. Now normally they would have water cannons around that curve, so as the train went by it would fire off these water cannons, but it was still pretty chilly out. It was only in the 50s, so they didn't bother doing that. Over on the left here is Snake River Falls, the park's massive shoot the chutes ride. That was completely dry because obviously in 50-degree weather you're not going to want to go get soaking wet. In the distance, the blue track is Millennium Force. And over on the right here is the glass blowing shop, where they actually have glass blowing demonstrations going on throughout the day. On a cold day like this, it's a wonderful place to be because they got that big oven in there that keeps you nice and warm. Actually, let's walk over and take a look. I don't think I've ever looked in here when they're doing a demonstration before. Okay, now this little building in front of us, Wild Turnip, is the park's vegetarian stand, and they have a lot of really good healthy offerings in there, including their own veggie burger. And of course, it was closed the whole time we were there. And over on the left is a grist mill that actually works during the normal year. They don't grind wheat there, but it actually functions and you can see everything turning inside. It's a nice museum piece. In fact, this whole area of Frontier Trail is a museum piece. A lot of the buildings were imported from other areas in Ohio and reconstructed to create a sort of frontier town. And over on the right there was the entrance to Thunder Canyon, which was the park's big river raft ride. And as with Snake River Falls, that wasn't running because nobody wanted to get wet. This is the shadiest area of the park, so if you're here on a really hot day, this is a good place to hang out. There aren't any real rides here to speak of. There is one section and a sort of ride, and I'll point that out in a minute. There's the petting zoo over here. That wasn't doing much business. I saw a turkey out there and a couple of donkeys earlier, but they had the place blocked off, so I didn't think they were ready to open at that point. But they have a lot of shops. They used to have a lot of craft people here making their own stuff. That's not so much the case anymore. But still, there's a lot of little places to peek into. So over on the left here, you see the Forbidden Frontier and Frontier Fling. Forbidden Frontier opened previous year, or 2 years ago, I can't remember. And it's sort of like this experience where you're taken in to this story and you have to help them out in the story. Sort of like what Disney's doing with Galaxy's Edge. Frontier Fling is a pretty standard sky coaster. A very tall one, but it's a standard sky coaster where you get pulled up in a harness and then dropped. There's some stocks over there to put your family in. And here's a little square on the right of shops. Not a lot of them were open that day. And this is a recreation of an old Ohio fort, complete with cannons. Up here on the left, during the normal season, they offer pony rides for kids. This really is one of my favorite areas of the park. It's much different from the rest of the park, which is incredibly high energy. This is much more low-key, which suits me fine. Notice the roof of the building on the right, completely covered in moss, and they're making absolutely no attempt to fix that. It gives it a lot of charm. A big steel tube on the right is one of the tunnels of Millennium Force, and you can see the track going up there. There are basically only 3 moments of airtime in all of Millennium Force for its 300 feet. The ride was built for speed. That's its main focus. And so to cut down on any slowing of the speed, they don't have a lot of hills in there. A lot of it is just kept low to the ground with a lot of turns. The orange track in the distance is Rougarou, formerly Mantis. Over here on the left is Albert, which used to be one of the steam engines that you would run on the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railway. It was retired and just put as a little scenic element there behind a Coca-Cola station. As you can see, everywhere the park has Coca-Cola. Not Pepsi, but Coke. And no, this is not a sponsored video. I don't drink the stuff. And we're gradually making our way to the main Midway. That big track in front of us is Valravn. Over here on the left is the Red Garter Saloon coming up. And that's really the end of the Frontier Trail. The park is about 300 acres. It seems a lot bigger to me. It's just takes a while to walk. Thankfully, there aren't any serious hills in it like you'd find at Busch Gardens or Dorney Park. It's pretty much all flat because it's a peninsula. It was once really just a giant cedar grove. That's where the name Cedar Point comes from. And now I think there are very, very few cedar trees left here. And speaking of plantings, you'll notice there's lots of dirt and mulch around. Obviously, it was a little too early for all the plants to start coming up. But Cedar Point has some amazing plantings, a lot of beautiful landscaping in the park. Way off on the left there, a big white structure. That's the power tower. And about a 300-foot high drop tower. There are 4 separate ones. 2 of them you get shot up, 2 of them you get shot down. And in front of us now is the final turn of Millennium Force before it hits the brake run. And under that is the actual entrance to the ride. You can see the big sign for Millennium Force in front of us. And the little blue tent there is where you actually enter. When I was there, the line wasn't too long. They were running all 3 trains and the wait was about an hour. It doesn't look like a long queue line, but it's a long queue line. And it's one of the most popular rides in the park. So if you want to ride it, I suggest getting there early. Of course, the day I was there filming this, it wasn't running, so it was a moot point. In front of us now is the South Station for the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railway. The other station that you get dropped off at was by Sagebrush Sue's, which we saw earlier in Frontier Town. There's the entrance to Rougarou on the left. An average attendance in the park during the normal season is about 30,000 people. Think about that in one park. And on busy days, you'll get upwards of 50 to 60,000 people in this park. It's absolutely huge. There's Valravn. It's a B&M drop coaster. And we'll be able to see the coaster drop right now. You'll notice that the train doesn't have anybody in it, so the ride was just testing. And whenever people saw rides testing on that day, they would immediately rush for the queue line to try to line up to make sure that if it did open, they would be one of the first people in line. And when I was there a little earlier in the day, there actually was an enormous line. I've never seen a line that long, stretching from the entrance, which we'll see in a minute, all the way out along the concourse and then off into the main midway. There had to be maybe 500 people in line, and it wasn't even open. Over there by the Cedar Point Watchtower, you can see Corkscrew, which was one of the first record-setting coasters that Cedar Point put in. It's pretty much vintage now, but it's still a really popular ride. The blue building that's sort of in front of us, that's the station for the Sky Ride, which takes you from here you would be at the north end of the main midway, and it will take you to the south end of the main midway near the entrance, or vice versa. And that's a really nice ride. That, again, because of the wind, was not running. Also, way in the distance, you can see Windseeker, which is basically a 300-foot swing ride, and that was not running either. The Ferris wheel, though, that you can see in the distance on the edge of the beach, that was running. The track to the right of that you can see, that's the lift hill for Gatekeeper, which was not running. Gatekeeper is neat because of how they designed it so that it swoops over the entrance, and we'll see that in a few minutes. The building in the distance on the left with the minarets on the top is the Coliseum, a huge Cedar Point building that houses a big meeting area, a ballroom basically, and offices, and then underneath is a huge arcade. So we're going to take a right here along this stretch of Midway that weaves around Valravn, and we'll go by Valravn's entrance and onto the Blue Streak concourse. This area gives you a good idea of how the park surrounds you with the rides. You're very, very close as the trains go whipping by you, and it's a really nice experience. Not a lot of parks do that. So the building in front of us there is Valravn Station, and notice all the people moving? They just opened up the ride to the public. So people are pouring in there, since this is one of the few coasters in the park that's actually running. And notice the guys in front of us are pretty excited. They're hurrying over there. The bright green track over here is Raptor, which was another record breaker when it opened and is still one of the most popular rides in the park. That's really intense. And here is the last remaining antique car ride in the park. And it's a nice one. It weaves in and out of the structure of the Raptor. And this blue lift hill in the distance was at one time the biggest ride in the park. Now it seems really quaint, but it's still, in my opinion, one of the best rides in the park. That's Blue Streak, built in 1964 by the great John Allen from Philadelphia Toboggan Company. And it's just an airtime machine. You just go out and you're flying over one hill after another. But look at this line. There goes the first train of passengers. Look at this line. I heard from somebody later on that it was actually about a 3-hour wait to get on that ride. But then again, there wasn't much else to do in the park at that point. And when I was there earlier in the day, as I said, this line actually stretched around the corner on the left and then all the way out under where that loop is for the Raptor. That was how long the line was. Not many people for Blue Streak, but I'm lined up for it whenever I go to the park. I love that ride. And over on the right there is Chicky and Pete's. It's really hard for me to believe that it's been nearly 30 years since Raptor went in. I just can't believe that much time has gone by. The day after I filmed this, I was able to get a ride on Millennium Force, and the guy I was in line with was just marveling at how Millennium Force, which at the time was this amazing ride that everybody said could not be done. You couldn't build a 300-foot tall coaster. And that was 22 years ago, which, again, boggles my mind how quickly time flies. So here we are on the main Midway now. And in front of us is Kiddie Kingdom with a lot of little kiddie rides. You can see the Ferris wheel there. And heading down north, you can see the Power Tower and Top Thrill Dragster and the Sky Ride above us. And you can see all this green area that still doesn't have flowers yet because they haven't finished planting. This walkway that we're on right here, when they had the 150th anniversary, you could buy a brick and have it say whatever you wanted to say on it, like, you know, congratulations or whatever, and they would put the brick into here with your name on it and your little saying. It's a nice little gesture. Over here are fresh cut fries, and they now have a cheese on a stick stand there. They didn't used to. It used to be behind us at another little concession, but that has been changed over into something called the Corral, and you actually go in there and it's basically just pizza and chicken nuggets and things like that, but no cheese on a stick. So there are 3 cheese on a stick stands left in Cedar Point. Very important. Only one of them was working, Sagebrush Sue's, while I was there. But boy, was it good. So now we're heading toward the entrance to the park. You can see up above the arcing track of Gatekeeper that flies over there. Hugo's is a sort of cafeteria style restaurant, and you can get, you know, typical Italian American food there. Over there on the left, the blue building is Toff's Ice Cream, which serves the best ice cream in the park. And next to that is the station for the Sky Ride, the South Station. And to the left of that is a Starbucks. Gotta have a Starbucks every park. You know, can't get enough caffeine. And way down there is the Carousel, one of 2 vintage, beautifully maintained carousels, and it has a working band organ, which scores big points in my book. In front of us is the Jack Aldrich Theater, which has musical theater presentations during the season. It didn't have anything while we were there. They hadn't done it yet. But the show that was advertised was called Come and See About Me, which I thought was a very strange title. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I have no idea what the show would be about. Point Plaza is the largest gift shop in the park, and Cedar Point has some of the most amazing merchandise in the industry. They're so big that they can do almost anything they want. So they have recreations of their roller coasters that you can buy in model form. They have one that's the Lift Hill of Millennium Force that comes in a wooden box. It's a wooden recreation of the Millennium Force lift that's about 2.5 feet high. They actually have, if you have the money to buy it, they have a model of one of the coaster trains from Maverick, and it's almost full size. Lots and lots of gifts, enormous numbers of t-shirts and sweatshirts, all sorts of stuff. Here's Ocean Motion. Now, in the past, you used to be able to walk right through there and keep going on the Midway, but they've blocked it off this year because they're working on some structures in that area. So if you were used to swinging by Ocean Motion to get around, you can't do that anymore. You have to go through here. French Quarter over there is a place that serves all sorts of pastries and sweets. You can hear the Wurlitzer band organ on the carousel playing. And, you know, it's a little out of tune, but I'd rather have one that's a little out of tune and running than one that just sits there not running. And you can see the sign in the distance. Coming up over here is the Mac Shack on the right, and it serves, as you might expect, macaroni and cheese. And there you can see the other side of that blockade that I was talking about. You can see there were stores there and you used to be able to walk through, but not right now. So we'll walk through the game row here and we'll head around to the east side of the park for the other big change that happened for this season. And they did have a fairly good number of games open, which was good to see, because that, of course, is how most parks make their money, is by you playing games. They did have a game on the Midway, and we passed it earlier in the video. I didn't mention it then. I had never seen a game like this. It costs $10 to play, and basically all you do is you hang from a bar. So they had a steel bar that was about 3 inches in diameter, and they would set it high enough so that if you clung to it, your feet wouldn't touch the ground. And the objective was to hang from it for 1.5 minutes. If you could do that, you'd win a little stuffed toy for $10. And Karen and I watched it for a while, and it was pretty funny. You know, in cold weather, that steel is really cold and it's hard to hang on to. And in hot weather, the steel is really hot and it's going to be hard to hang on to. But even that, we saw, you know, kids that looked like they were pretty muscular try it out, and they just could not last 1.5 minutes. The only one I saw do it was a little kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and he was able to do it, and he won a little prize. But that's an interesting idea. I've never seen that type of game concession. Now over on the left is Max Air, a giant frisbee ride. And of course, at the time it was built, it was the largest one of its kind. And those little sort of spiky wave things that you see in the distance is the entrance to Gatekeeper, the B&M Wing Coaster. But those of you who know the park are looking at this view going, something's missing there. There used to be another coaster right in front of us. It was Wicked Twister, the Intamin shuttle coaster with 2 massive 200-foot spikes at either end. And the park removed it this year. They said it was just past its prime and they have other ideas for the spot. I don't know what they're going to put there because it was a very, very narrow footprint that coaster had. It took up almost no space. So it made sense to have it right at the edge of the beach like that. But all they have there now is that fence and then emptiness. So, this is why I said I'm not sure what the park coaster count is. The park is still claiming that they have 17 coasters, and I didn't tally them all up, so maybe they do. But I thought they had 17 coasters before, and without Wicked Twister that would make it 16, but who knows. Maybe they count the Sky Coaster as a coaster. I don't know. But at any rate, here we are on the east edge of the park, and there's a lot of fencing. And, you know, they still have the 2 little flat rides that they've had there. And there's Windseeker way down there. And the Kiddieland is on our left, as is the Dodgems. There's the entrance to the Ferris wheel. It seems like this big expanse of nothing here. So I suspect that the park has plans for this area because it just seems like an enormous waste of space right now. That is a gorgeous Ferris wheel, though, and a really nice location for it. So this fence is sticking out really far. Now this is where the old Seaquarium used to be that they had for many years. And Wicked Twister was not in this spot. So I'm not sure what they're planning here, but they are doing something. If we can squeeze in here and take a peek. You can see there's a lot of land that they could utilize. So I suspect that in 2023 there will be something going on in that area. But we'll have to wait and see for that. Right now, the park is very hush-hush on it. Over here is Planet Snoopy, the back end of it, which is another kiddie area. So that makes 3 separate kiddie areas that they have in the park, which is really nice. There's Roost over here on the left, which is yet another eatery. And this whole area is formally known as the Lakeside Midway. In front of us, that huge building you see, that's part of the suite of offices that Cedar Point has. And over here you can see a little more of Planet Snoopy. They also have a really nice Peanuts boutique, and when we were there it was being remodeled. So I assume they'll have something new there coming up pretty soon. There's the entrance to Windseeker, and there's also the Windseeker gate there. It's another entrance to the park. If you're staying in the Breakers Hotel, that's how you would get into the park. So let's now head west along here. There's Melt, which serves grilled cheese. And the coaster in front of us, just for orientation, is Valravn again. Now coming up on the right, it looks like it's another section of Midway that would take you around, but it's actually the place where employees go to check in. And they also have their own little cafeteria over there. So that's not for public consumption in that area. And this is bringing us back out onto the main Midway here. There's another part of Planet Snoopy over there. And over on the left in front of us, far in the distance there, is the Pagoda gift shop, which I think has the nicest gifts if you want t-shirts or sweatshirts, any clothing like that. They're phenomenal in there. They're all very nicely themed to all different rides at Cedar Point. And over on the left there you can see an Auntie Anne's Pretzels, the ubiquitous Auntie Anne's. There are 2 different ones in the park. So if you like your pretzels hot and greasy, that's where to get them. And there's the Sky Ride Station again. And you can see the Scrambler over on the right, and there's also a Matterhorn over there. And we're going to be heading right underneath the Corkscrew over there. And that's going to take us over to the Gemini Midway. This Corkscrew area is what really ended up defining Cedar Point in the 1980s through the 2000s. It was an amazing attempt at putting people in the middle of rides. I mean, you get really, really close to this train when it's going around. You know, not so close you're going to get hurt, obviously. But it really created an amazing visceral thrill. And they've continued that trend. Over on the left there, you see this new area that they planted a couple trees and bushes there and put chairs around it. Right now, you'd basically be sitting in the baking sun, but in about 20 years down the road, that'll be a nice little shady spot. I'll be going there in my walker, most likely. Here you get a really good sense of how close you get to these coasters. It's amazing to me how wobbly that track looks compared to modern roller coasters. This type of structure was still pretty new when it was built, and we just assume that's the way coasters look. Over there on the left is another Aero Development coaster. That's Iron Dragon, one of the last suspended coasters left of its kind. And there's, of course, the power tower and the entrances around the corner there. And in the distance, you have the entrance to Top Thrill Dragster. And I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but when I rode Top Thrill Dragster, I ended up with a little problem. The ride launches you with a hydraulic cable, pulls you from 0 to 120 miles an hour in 3 seconds. So that's a lot of G's. And I noticed a couple days after riding it that I was having trouble seeing out of my left eye. And it turned out the ride caused a vitreous detachment in my eye. So the gel sort of fell apart. So if you're going to ride Top Thrill Dragster when it reopens, make sure you're in good health. And young, I assume. Not for somebody my age anymore, I guess. I do like the fact that in the distance there on the left, you can see how they have a grandstand, like in a racing track. And you can sit there and watch the thing take off. Originally, that used to be packed when the ride was new. They still have quite a few people watching it. It's pretty funny to watch the people's faces as they get blasted off. And there's the station for the Corkscrew over on the right. And here you can see the sign that said the ride was delayed because of high winds, which puzzled me because the Corkscrew is not a very tall ride. I mean, I can see if you have a 300-foot high ride, yeah, wind's going to be a big problem there. But with the low size of this ride, I was surprised by that. It actually did open shortly after I finished this video. They got it going again, so things slowly came back online. In the distance there, you can see that huge hotel complex. That is the Breakers. And it was recently remodeled, and it was a really historic building. It was pretty much kept original from when it was built, but the park finally decided it was time for a major upgrade, so there isn't much left of the original configuration of the building. But it is a very nice hotel, and it has a Perkins restaurant in the lobby area. And anyone can go to the Perkins restaurant. You don't have to be a guest in the hotel. This little area with gravel on the right, it used to house a John Deere tractor advertisement with a John Deere tractor there, and I guess they're not doing that sponsorship anymore, so it's just an empty gravel area. Top Thrill Dragster, as you probably would guess, was the tallest roller coaster of its kind when it was built at 410 feet. But it was bested just 4 years later by King Dakar, a very similar ride. And even that has not dimmed its popularity in the park. Top Thrill is still a very popular ride because that type of adrenaline rush you don't get on very many other coasters, eye damage or not. There's the entrance to Magnum, which, when it was built, was the largest roller coaster of its kind. And it's still a really good ride. I do enjoy that one. And this brings us back to where we started. In front of us is the Backbeat queue, and on the right is the entrance to the park. So, this ends our 2022 tour of Cedar Point, the Amazement Park. And it still has an enormous amount to offer for kids of all ages. Great family place, lots of places to stay, not just in the park and on the grounds, but the area is filled with all sorts of hotels and campgrounds. There's a KOA campground just down the street. So if you're in this area, the Sandusky, Ohio area, by all means, check out the Amazement Park and make sure to get a cheese on a stick while you're there.